almost near the beginning of the Bible. Got to Genesis, you've gone too far. Exodus chapter 33. And this is Moses, an account of Moses and him meeting with God in the tent. And starting at verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I'll give it to you. I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way.' When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, 'Tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you.' So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance, while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to his tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. And Moses said to the Lord, 'You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people.' And the Lord replied, 'My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest.' Then Moses said to him, 'If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will diminish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and know you by name.'" As I said earlier, this morning we're looking at worship, and in particular we're looking at the fact that if we draw close to God, God will draw close to us. There was an elderly lady, and she was a Sunday school teacher, and she was teaching the grade 4 and 5-year-olds, and they were doing this one lesson about learning about the building of the temple. And she explained to the students that when the temple was finished, the presence of the Lord filled the temple. Instantly, their eyes just grew huge, and they were full of excitement. They thought, this is great. And soon she discovered, however, what the source of their excitement was. Not joy that God had come to dwell in the temple, but rather they were absolutely excited about the image of a huge building filled with presence from God. Aren't we sometimes like those children? We easily get more excited about our presence from God than being in the presence of God. As we begin this morning, as I've shared with you already, James 4:8 says this, it says, "Draw close to God, and God will draw close to you." I once heard it said that you are as close to God as you choose to be. You are as close to God as you choose to be. It's like any relationship that you have. You have to work at developing your friendship with God. You have to work at developing your friendship with other people. There's a bunch of you in here that are Facebook people, and I'm sure that you have all kinds of friends on Facebook. I think I have only, some people, like they have over 1,000. I have 235. And the thing that I find is that they're mostly people that I once knew. People from high school, or people from community college, or people, from my past. But now we're just acquaintances. Every once in a while you'll see something that they're doing and you'll think, oh, that's really neat. Oh, yeah. But they're not really close relationships. They're not close friendships. Because you see, close relationships, they don't happen by accident. It takes work. It takes a desire to be close to someone. It takes time. It takes energy. And that's just like our relationship with God. If you want a deeper, more intimate connection with God, you must learn to honestly share your feelings with Him. You must trust Him when He asks you to do something. You must learn to care about what He cares about. And you must desire to be His friend more than anything else. And so this morning I want to look at those 4 things. And the first one is that we must choose to be honest with God. You see, one of the main parts of a good friendship is honesty. Would you agree with me in that? If somebody lies or tells you half-truths, well, are you going to trust them? No. That's the way it is with friendships. You're not going to be close to somebody. It's going to be a hard thing to have a close friendship with someone who lies. And it's the same with God. We must choose to be honest with God about our faults, about our feelings, about our failings. You see, anything that you tell God, it isn't going to catch Him off guard. It's not going to take Him by surprise. He's been there the whole time watching. He knows what you're thinking. He knows what you're going through. And so you're not going to catch God off guard. But being honest with Him means that you're not trying to, cover things up, sweep things under the carpet. God doesn't expect us to be perfect. That's not what I'm saying. But He does insist on honesty. If perfection was required for friendship with God, well, I don't think any of us would be friends with Him. Because we are not perfect. In the Bible, the friends of God were honest about their feelings, often complaining, second-guessing, accusing, and arguing with God. If you flip back in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 18, there's the account of Abraham. And God told Abraham that He was going to bring destruction upon Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham's kind of distraught about this because there's a lot of people in these 2 cities. And he's thinking, really? You're going to destroy them all? And you see, the reason why He's going to destroy them is because of their debauchery, which means that they were just dirty, rotten, filthy sinners. And they were trying to do something that was really not so good. And so, Abraham, however, he has compassion. He has feeling for these folks. And in Genesis chapter 18, he starts arguing with God. And he says, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, the Lord, just one second now. I have to go back to 24. What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare that place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Far be it for you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will you not judge? Will not the judge of all the earth do right? And the Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I'll spare the whole place. And then Abraham said, what about 40? Actually it was 50, 45, then it was 40, then he says 30, then he goes to 20, and then he says, what if only 10 can be found there? And he answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And when the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. You see, Abraham was seeking to be honest with him. He was challenging. He was questioning. He was saying, what about, Lord? What about? And then you have David. We read from Psalm 27 earlier. In Psalm 27, we have David just seeking God's face. The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble? David, he shared through a lot of the Psalms. He wrote a lot of the Psalms. And in there, he was very honest with God. He often complained. He shared his feelings. He even second-guessed and accused and argued with God. I've included actually 3 Psalms within the daily readings that you find in the bulletin to ponder this week, to read and to spend time with. Also, we had just read from Exodus chapter 33. And God declared his total disgust with Israel's disobedience. He told Moses he would keep his promise to give the Israelites the promised land, but he wasn't going to go with them. And Moses, well, he got kind of indignant. And Moses, speaking as a friend, responded with honesty. And he said to him in Exodus 33, 12 to 17, and I'm reading this from the Message because it just gives it a little bit of a different twist. It says, look, tell me, lead this people. Look, you tell me, lead this people, but you don't let me know whom you're going to send with me. If I am so special to you, let me in on your plans. Don't forget, this is your people, your responsibility. This is Moses talking to God. If your presence doesn't take the lead here, call this trip off right now. How else will we be known that you're with me in this, with me and your people? Are you traveling with us or not? And God said to Moses, all right, just as you say, this also I will do. For I know you well and you are special to me. I know you by name. You see, one of the things that we have to realize is that God can handle and wants that kind of frank honesty with each of us as well. You see, to be God's friend, we need to be honest. We need to share our true feelings. Not what you think you ought to feel or ought to say. You have to confess to God some whatever is maybe standing in the way. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's bitterness or resentment that you're holding in your heart. But when you're honest with God and you share these sweet things with Him, well, then you draw close to God. And He will draw close to you. And so we need to be honest with Him. The second thing that I think that we need to choose is to obey God in faith. You see, every time you trust God's wisdom and do whatever He says, even when you don't understand it, you draw close to God. Jesus made it clear that obedience is a condition of intimacy with God. We read earlier, Noah did, from John chapter 15. And in verse 14 it says this. It says, you are my friends. Can you read this with me? If you do what I command. Right? We obey God, not out of duty or fear or compulsion, but because we love Him. And we trust that He knows what's best for us. We want to follow Christ out of thanksgiving for all He has done for us. And as we draw close to God, He does what? He draws close to us. Right? Remember what Jesus said in John 15, 9 to 11. He said, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commands and remain in His love. I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. Did you catch that? Jesus did whatever the Father asked Him to do. Out of what? Out of love. Out of love. Jesus did what God wanted him to do. And you see, even the small things we do for God are noticed by him. And he sees them as acts of worship and obedience. Even the small things, holding the door for somebody as you're coming in or out of the mall. Maybe giving someone a handshake or a hug or a good word. You know, I love you. Proud of you. All of these different things. Last week, we looked at Jesus' early years. We were looking at Mary and how Mary ended up raising Jesus. And in Luke chapter 2, verse 51, it says this about Jesus. It says that he went back to Nazareth with them. That's Mary and Joseph. This was after he had spent time in 3 days in Jerusalem. They went back. They tried to find him. And it says, and he lived obediently with them. Jesus, who knew that he was his heavenly Father's son, went back and obeyed his earthly parents, Mary and Joseph. He obeyed them. Why did he obey them? Because he loved them. And God loved them too. There's a fellow by the name of Robert, and I cannot pronounce his last name. It's Kupferschmid. I will call him Robert. And he was 81 years old, and he was out flying with a friend in his little Cessna plane. I got one right up there. That's a Cessna 172. And he's out flying with his friend. He has no experience. And then something happens to his friend who's the pilot. He was going along, and his 52-year-old friend, Wesley Sickle, they were flying from Indianapolis to Indiana, and during the flight, he slumped over. His friend slumped over, Wesley slumped over, and he died. And he died on the controls. And so the Cessna plane started to nosedive, because when you push ahead on the stick, well, it goes down. And so he's going down, and Robert, he ends up grabbing the controls. He kind of slumps his friend off to the side, and he tries to do something, but he doesn't know what to do. And so he grabs the radio. He starts pleading for help. And nearby there are two other pilots who heard his call and ended up coming to his aid. And Mount Comfort was the closest airport. And so the two pilots gave Robert a steady stream of instructions of ways to climb, to steer, ways to do the scariest part, land, because he would have to land. And so the two experienced pilots, they circled the runway 3 times before this somewhat frantic and totally inexperienced pilot was ready to attempt the landing. They had called ahead. The emergency vehicles were ready for what seemed to be, likely an approaching disaster. Witnesses said that the plane's nose nudged the center line and bounced a few times before the tail hit the ground, and the Cessna ended up in a patch of soggy grass off on the side of the railway, or the runway. And Robert got out of the plane, and he wasn't injured. You see, this pilot listened. He wasn't a pilot, but he listened. He followed the instructions of the men who knew what they were doing, because his life depended on it. And it did. Imagine what would take place in the lives of all believers if we not only listened, but we obeyed the Word of God with the same earnestness. And so we must choose. We must choose to be honest. We must choose to obey. We also must choose to value what God values. See, this is what friends do. You value what your friend values. You care about what is important to the other person. And this is the same with God. You see, the more you draw close to God, the more you will care about the things that he cares about. You will grieve over the things that he grieves over, and rejoice over the things that bring pleasure to him. Paul is an amazing example of this. God's plan was his plan, and God's passion was his passion. In 2 Corinthians 11:2, from the Message, this is what Paul says. He says, "The thing that has me so upset is that I care about you so much." This is the passion of God burning inside of me. What is it that God cares about? He cares about each and every one of you. And what was it that Paul was upset about? It was about that he cared so much for the people that he was ministering to. David felt the same way. In Psalm 69:9, it says this. It says, "Passion for your house has consumed me, and the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me." He loves God so much that even when God is insulted by others, he feels like he's being insulted himself. What is it that God values? God values loving him. God values loving your neighbors. God values making disciples. See, this is the heart of God. And Jesus put it this way at the very beginning of his ministry in chapter 4 of Luke, verses 18 and 19, quoting from Isaiah. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has appointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." What is it that God cares about? God wants people to know the good news. "He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners." What is it that God cares about? He cares about people being free from bondage and sin. "He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, so that we can see things through his eyes clearly. To set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." See, God cares about everybody. Back the week of Easter, there was a musical on called Grease at the high school. And after that, Catherine was taken to McDonald's on Wednesday night by her friend Autumn and her mom, Natasha. And while we were at McDonald's, Natasha said that she would like Catherine to come over to her house on the night of May 4th so that Catherine could go to school at the Christian school with Autumn on May 5th. And I said to her, I said, "Natasha, the only way that you can do that is if you come to a presentation that's going to be here on May 4th. It's Calvin Smith is going to come, and he's going to be talking about evolution and creation. I want you to come, be part of that. You know, bring Autumn with you, listen to the presentation, so that, and then afterwards you can take Catherine back to your house." She said, "Okay, I can do that. That'd be great. I love to, hear about these things." So, first step. The week before that presentation, that night of May the 4th, there was a young man in our community who took his own life, Matthew. I ended up having the privilege of being able to minister to the family and to be able to help them through the process of grief and to be able to have the funeral. One of the things I normally do in a funeral is I ask people to share a personal word. And so Sheila said, well, actually it was the funeral director who told me, he said, "Why don't you ask Wendy Alcorn to say the personal word?" You may know Wendy. She works up at the One Stop, which is now Circle K. So she came and she shared the personal word, and I was able to, connect with her on a personal level. And so then May 4th comes. And after the presentation, Tracy got a phone call over at the house. And it was Wendy Alcorn up at the One Stop. And she was calling for help. And she said, "Last person you thought that you'd hear from so quick, isn't it? Because I had just had the funeral the day before for Matthew." And what had happened is that there was a young girl who had gotten kicked out of her car in the parking lot. She came in, she had only a tank top and shorts on. And her boyfriend said, "Get out, I don't want to see you anymore, don't ever come back." And so Wendy didn't know who to call because she wanted to meet the needs of this young girl. So she calls me because she had seen me the day, we had made a connection. So Tracy comes in and she shares about this girl and how can we meet this need. Here comes Tasha. Okay? Tasha works at State Farm in Sussex. And the transition house call State Farm quite often to tell them whether they have beds or, all of that stuff. And Natasha knows everything about the transition house. So when Tracy shares with me that there's a young girl up at the one stop that is in need of help, Tasha's right there and she says, oh, just call up the transition house. They'll send a car, they'll look after her. And her big concern was that she had medication that she needed to take that was at her boyfriend's house. And Tasha said, oh, they'll send the cops over to his house and get the medication for her, God cared about that young girl not being left alone. Back in, Greece time, Natasha, I invited her to come here to see Calvin Smith. I had a funeral for a young man. It was a tragic, tragic funeral. But here God put things all together so that night, Tasha's here, I'm here, Wendy's up there, and this girl is looked after. I went up and asked Wendy a couple of days after that what had taken place. She said, well, I called, they sent a cab for her, that's all I know. I said, that's all we need to know, because she's in the hands of those who care. I don't know if you know it or not, but the director at the transition house is a Christian lady who loves Jesus. And in being the director at the transition house, she's loving these women who are coming in broken, bruised, and in need of healing and help. Think about that. God values even the young girl who got kicked out of her car so much that he orchestrated all these things to be in place so that when she's in need, the need is met. And she's cared for and looked after. We must choose to be honest with God. We must choose to be obedient to God. We must choose to value what God values, and we must desire friendship with God more than anything else. You see, the Psalms are filled with examples of this desire. David passionately desired to know God above all else. He used words like longing, yearning, thirsting, hungering. He craved God. In Psalm 27, verse 4, in the Living Bible, it says this. It says, the thing I seek most, I think it's right there. Let's read this together. The thing I seek most of all is the privilege of meditating in his temple, living in his presence every day of my life, delighting in his incomparable perfections and glory. And I want you to read Psalm 63:3 with me as well. Your love means more than life to me. Wow. Paul was another man passionate, as I said, about drawing close to God. Nothing mattered more. It was his first priority. It was his total focus. It was his ultimate goal in life. This is the reason why Paul used these words in such a powerful way in Philippians 3:10. He said, for my determined purpose is that I may know him, that I may progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with him, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of his person more strongly and more clearly. You see, the truth is, I shared this with you at the beginning, you are as close to God as you choose to be. Intimate friendship with God is a choice. It's not an accident. And we must intentionally seek it. We must draw close to God, and God will draw close to us. I love what it says in Psalm 27. The last two verses, 13 and 14, it says, I remain confident of this. Read the rest with me. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. You see, I